I call on the back row for questions. So. Is it turn on?
Okay, I think we can get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to this panel. My name is Aileen. I'm Director of Partnerships here at the Roux Institute, and I'm going to be introducing our moderator for today, Dan Nigrin, who's Chief Information Officer at MaineHealth. Dan moved to Maine pretty recently.
6 months, yeah.
About 6 months ago. Prior to joining MaineHealth, Dan was the lead for technology at Boston Children's Hospital, and he's also a pediatric endocrinologist by training and a former assistant professor in pediatrics at Harvard Medical School. And Dan has been really instrumental in helping this event and today happen. He has served on the advisory committee for the State of AI event, and he's featured in the report that most of you received when you arrived today. So I'm going to hand it over to Dan. We're going to try to stay on time, and following the panel, we will have a reception with refreshments. So I invite you all to stay and network. So thanks for being here, and I'll hand it over to Dan.
Thanks so much, Elena. There's only one worse thing than being the last presentation before lunch, and that's being the last presentation before the bar opens. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. As Elena said, I've been involved with the efforts leading up to this conference, and it's so exciting to me to see the number of people who've turned out, and just the quality and the content of the presentation so far has just been incredibly motivating for me, and I can't contain my excitement. I hope you can feel that. I'm going to introduce each of the panelists only by name, and I'm going to ask them, pass the mic down, and ask them to introduce themselves a little bit, just because I feel that always adds a little bit of flavor. And then we'll do our panel a little bit differently, in that we're going to start off with this question. Oh my God, we already got the answer. So for those of you who haven't answered yet, you can answer while we're doing intros. And then we'll launch into a couple of questions. I'm going to ask the same questions of all of our panelists, and I'll tell you why in a moment. So we've got Vivek Kumar, we've got Winslow, Jen Fogel, Brian Bousquet-Smith, and Aileen Huang-Saad. So, Vivek, why don't you start?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. So my name is Vivek Kumar. I'm a faculty at the Jackson Laboratory, and I've been kind of in the space of using machine learning and what we call artificial intelligence methods for about the last 4 or 5 years. And I come from it from a really practical end, which is I'm interested in neurotherapeutics. We know that in the drug development part, really there hasn't been a lot of innovation, especially for psychiatric drugs. We're still using drugs from the 1950s and 60s. And one of there are many reasons for that. One of the fundamental things that we kind of focus on are better animal models. Before a drug goes into human, we need to have them kind of tested and kind of functional in animals. So how do you, what is the mouse model of a bipolar disorder look like? What does the mouse model of autism look like? And then how do you use those animals to get better neurotherapeutics? And so my lab has kind of been developing better methods of animal phenotyping. We use the resources at the Jackson Laboratory, these animal models that are sitting around. How long do I have?
So you're over, because we're just saying
okay.
that.
Okay, Vivek Kumar.
But he's worth listening to. He's a very interesting fellow.
It's hard to hear you.
It's on. Maybe we just need to boost the volume.
Winslow. I'm a biomedical engineer by training. Spent 30 years in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, where I started the Institute for Computational Medicine. I've always, throughout my career, worked in modeling of disease. More recently, the modeling methods have expanded to include AI and machine learning-based approaches. However, I was born in Maine. I grew up here. I love Maine. Always wanted to be back in Maine. And so when the Roux was created exactly 3 years ago today, and a few months later they contacted me, I decided that's for me. I'm going there. And so I'm very glad to be here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jen Fogel. I am Vice President, Chief Nursing Informatics Officer for Northern MaineHealth. There are three of us, actually, and my focus is acute and hospital operations. So I have been with the organization. I'm in year 43, so you can see that I started when I was very young. And when my computer, when I started, was a 3-color pen. So if you asked me when I started nursing if I'd be where I am today, the answer was no, because we didn't even have a computer. So.
Hi everyone, I'm Brian Bousquet Smith. I'm the head of operations for MedRhythms, formerly the head of engineering. My background is in computer and electrical engineering. Grew up in the state of Maine, and I'm excited to be here and talk about the technology in the state.
Hi, my name is Aileen Huang-Saad. I'm the Director of Life Sciences, Health, and Engineering here at the Roux, and I think primarily about talent and retention. My background is biomedical engineering as well. I started my career at Johns Hopkins as a graduate student and spent actually 10 years in industry, and that informed my work at University of Michigan, where I spent 14 years really thinking about how to close the gap between professional practice and higher education. And so I'm so excited to be here because the 4 pillars that really make the Roux sing are what I've been doing for my career. So, yeah.
Thanks so much, everyone. So this is fascinating to me because I was convinced that we would have a broader distribution of responses here, but it seems that the vast majority of us seem to think that we're either already there or we're just about there, just a few more years, and we'll see a lot of AI. Maybe there's a little bit of self-selection involved. I mean, you did all come to an AI conference, but still, this is fascinating to me. And I think, as you'll hear as we go through the questions, I think you guys pretty much got it right. AI is definitely here and coming fast. So I'm going to present my first question, and then I'll cheat a little bit and give you my response to the question, but then I'm going to pass it down the row. And so the question is really open-ended, and I wanted to frame an open-ended question because, as you heard, we have a pretty broad and diverse set of panelists with respect to their healthcare backgrounds and organizations, from provider organizations, Jen and I, to wet lab, research labs, to educational aspects, to startups. We have a broad representation. And so the question really is, how is AI present in each of your organizations? Or how are you thinking about AI? How is it impacting what your particular organization is working on? Just tell us about AI in your shop, basically. And so I work at MaineHealth, as you heard, and we have a number of different AI activities going on. But the one that excites me the most that I'd like to tell you about is something that affects clinical practice. I practiced clinically for about 30 years. And one of the things that annoyed me the most, I loved seeing my patients. I loved caring for kids. But documentation was just so burdensome, and especially as those darn technologists rolled out the electronic health record, that put an even bigger burden on all of the practitioners. So if we could only get rid of that documentation piece, you'd really make a lot of clinical care and the providers of that care a lot happier. And so, wouldn't you know it, AI has come to the rescue. There are now commercial systems available that essentially listen to a doctor's conversation or a clinical care provider's conversation with the patient in an exam room. And not only do they transcribe the conversation accurately, accounting for the different voices in the room, they can determine the substance of what was said, so much so that it can generate the clinical documentation for that encounter. I refer to this as Star Trek, basically. This is like tricorder, bones kind of stuff, which is amazing to me. This is like a dream come true. Now, it's almost there. There's still some learning to happen. There's a human involved, Osama, there's a human involved in the loop to make sure that the output of that AI is as accurate as it needs to be. But this is an incredible step forward. And I anticipate within the next year, 2 years, it's going to be widely deployed. So that's my little anecdote. I'm going to pass it to Vivek.
I get to be first again. Okay, so as I was mentioning in terms of using the mouse more effectively for drug development and understanding what the behavioral features are that are important, I think we're actually on the other end, which is we have these basic models, but we haven't, we don't have, I would say, models that adequately work for the mouse. And so we're on the other end of trying to generate training data, trying to understand, how does a mutation in a mouse that leads to autism in a human case, when we make that analogous mutation in the animal, how that would change the behavior of the animal, and then using, understanding that behavior at high resolution to essentially do drug screening or to come up with better therapeutics. Of course, at the Jackson Laboratory, there's a lot of work going on around using genomics and machine learning and AI methods for genomic discoveries. Of course, the other part of it is integration of data, genomics, behavior, even other modalities of data like electronic health records, and I think that's another area where there's a lot of room for improvement.
So I direct life science and medical research at Roux, so there's two areas in my life that AI touches on. First is healthcare. I think there are three core questions that every physician asks and needs to answer whenever they see a patient. And that is, what's the state of my patient? Where is their healthcare trajectory taking them? Are they going to get better? Are they going to get worse? And the third is, do I need to intervene? And if yes, how do I intervene to help this patient? All three of those questions are answerable using AI approaches, and there's hundreds of examples in the peer-reviewed literature, many of which are undergoing translation right now. To illustrate this, I like to say that in my opinion, medicine is becoming an increasingly engineering-based and computationally-based discipline, which means that models, including AI and machine learning-derived models, are going to be increasingly informing and helping physicians and other caregivers make the decisions that they make. And I said informing, and I should have used the phrase, models will make recommendations to acknowledge the need for a human always to be in the loop. AI and modeling in general will provide just another data element for the physician to consider when thinking about their patient and how to treat them. In the life sciences, I spent a lot of my career building very detailed mechanistic models of what disease is fundamentally, so that those models could be used to inform drug discovery, fundamental understanding of disease, and in general to think about how do we design therapies. Mechanistic modeling is slow and very hard. Machine learning approaches in life sciences offers the opportunity for us to understand how to relate the measurements we make to the phenotypes we care about, and to ask core questions like, what genetic features really drive phenotypic variation? And what are the regulators of disease? What are the control points of disease? And so we're going to see a blossoming of AI and machine learning approaches to understanding the fundamental basis of disease and how to target disease to cure it.
Thanks, Ray. And just a reminder for all our panelists to
Sing into the mic.
sing.
So, for Northern Light Health, and for my role in particular, I think, let me set it back. Everyone knows healthcare is struggling financially. It is a reality that COVID has put upon us, and we in Maine are not alone. We are in that problem around the country, including workforce. Finding a nurse to staff a bed is extremely difficult. And so the ability to use machine learning and AI to help with understanding what is coming into your organization and how you can staff those beds is extremely important. We were very fortunate to partner as development partners. We're a Cerner shop, and develop with them what we call the Command Center dashboard. And they took 3 years of our data and put it through their algorithms. I think there were 75 algorithms or so they put it through so that we can predict what our census is going to look like in 4, 8, and 12 hours. So we have these dashboards that show real-time data. It is predicting what we're going to look like based on the predictions in the past. And we're able to adjust our staffing and look at what we have coming in through our various portals, whether it's ED or our ORs, to make sure that we have the staff where we need to. And this is really important as throughput, considering the number of patients that are sitting in our EDs waiting for a bed, because those numbers are much higher than they ever were pre-COVID. And we really need to find ways using our data and those algorithms and the AI to help us be more thoughtful in our patient throughput and those type of things.
Yeah, so at MedRhythms, MedRhythms is a small 40-person digital therapeutic startup in Portland, Maine. We create a application that helps stroke survivors learn to walk again using sensors and music. So from our standpoint of AI, ML, we're really thinking about rural health and how we can start to support these people in the wild. And one of the big challenges when we think of rural health is connectivity and access to the internet or access to cellular reception, et cetera. So when we think of AI ML on our side, we think of it back end. We think of it, how can we optimize data? How can we better support these patients in the wild, especially in a state like Maine, where we're trying to support a growing and growing geriatric population with a small group of people.
Thanks for recognizing me.
So these are incredible ways to think about how AI and ML are going to be impacting medicine and healthcare. And from an educational perspective, where it fits into my world is as we're trying to increase the talent for the bioeconomy and the healthcare system here, we really need to think about how to make sure our students are well skilled in order to support these services, right? So not only in terms of a technology developer, but a user. I think we heard this in our earlier education program, is there's a general data literacy that we need to make sure that the entire community is upskilled in order to even meet the, I think the 43% that people think that this is going to really infiltrate the healthcare system, because we have to remember the users on the other side need to be able to engage this technology. And so that's how we think about it from the educational perspective.
Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. So the next question is sort of the converse, I guess. You could think of it. There have been obviously many positive aspects of AI and how it's affected your organizations or impacted your organizations. What are some of the unexpected impacts of AI, or even potentially negative impacts? Are you concerned about some of the equity issues? Are you concerned about any of the training sets used for the various algorithms behind some of this technology? Let's talk about the dark underbelly, if you will. Maybe that's a little bit ominous, but you get what I'm going for. So Vivek?
Yeah, working with mice, we don't have to deal with it. So, although we do have a lot of diversity in mice, so I think the healthcare folks here will probably add more. For us, a big challenge is implementation. So we can develop algorithms, but then to get them implemented into the scientific community is a big challenge, because our colleagues who are behaviorists are not always adept at machine learning and kind of have even the resources. We're lucky at JAX to have a huge computing infrastructure and IT and CS teams, but that doesn't exist for all organizations, or certainly not accessible to all labs. So democratizing AI, democratizing methods is a real big challenge for us. And as within the state of Maine, I think we should think about this, because I know there's a big storage farm going up in northern Maine, because there's cool water from the Androscoggin River, and that's been used to cool the towers. Why not build something like that for GPU or CPU, those types of resources here in Maine? So democratization is really a key issue for us.
I'm going to talk about the good and the bad. The good is when I was thinking about coming here, I certainly loved the idea that Roux wanted to develop the areas that I was working in. It was a perfect match. But I also saw MaineHealth as a large healthcare provider, as a potential source of data, and as a natural translational outlet. That has been the great news here. The energy and interest of clinicians is astounding. MaineHealth and Maine Medical Center are just kind of at the sweet spot in size. They have strong research, strong clinical operations, but they aren't huge. They aren't the 800-pound gorilla. They're large, but they're not too large, and so they're still nimble and more able to take on and act on new ideas. That's been the great news of being here. The difficulty is not surprising. A lot of AI applications require that we capture different kinds of data from patients that are even being captured right now. It's a heavy lift. It's a really heavy IT. Even the act of extracting large sets of data from the EMR for thousands and thousands of patients for many different research studies, that's also a hard lift. So while the data may even be there in many instances, in other instances, we have to build an infrastructure for capturing the data we need. Like in our HEART project, healthcare enabled by AI in real time, which is in the cardiothoracic ICU. We're going to be acting on physiological data from patient monitors. It's high-frequency waveforms and vital signs data that are coming at a high rate. We have to build the infrastructure to capture this data. So it's no surprise, but it's the challenge in AI applications in healthcare is the heavy lift of getting at data.
So I think one of the challenges is trust. Do I trust AI? Do I trust the data that is telling me? I'm a physician. I have chart assistants telling me I need to document this because I don't have enough specificity in my record to get the revenue out that I should be. But I don't trust that. I'm the doctor. I know what is supposed to be there. And so getting them to develop that trust of the data is huge. And it has been a slow process for us to get there. We have those that have adopted it. We're starting to see their numbers grow with their adoption of using the suggested additions to their documentation. But we have a lot that are still ignoring that they're even getting it. So it's a lot of the trust. And I'll give you another great example of trust. When we went live with the Command Center dashboard, our nursing supervisors were writing down the predictive sentences for it and then looking in 4 hours to see how close it was. Because they were like, oh, I don't believe this. And then they're all of a sudden, after a month, they're like, I don't know why we're tracking this because it's right. So, of course, nurses adopt much quicker than those physicians, but that's just how it goes.
I'm so glad you went that route. From the diagnostic side or the patient side, it's the same problem. It's trusting the application is going to work. That's why I think a lot of times we're always going to see a human in the loop. Having a true diagnostic AI is going to be really hard to implement in the world, regardless of use case. I think there's always going to be a physician, always going to be a nurse, always going to be somebody behind that AI engine that is double checking or at least glancing at it to ensure that there aren't any mistakes.
And so, Aileen, just before you go, to let folks know, we'll open it up for questions just after this. I probably neglected to say that up front, so if you've got them, just hang on a moment more.
So with trust comes, I think you also have to trust the people that aggregated the data and then actually created the tool, because you can't just say that, oh, I trust AI. It's, do you trust how it was actually developed for those things? And I think that's why it's so critical at an educational perspective. We have to do better at making sure that our students understand the ethical implications of their choices, and really to be very conscientious, because someone's not always going to be looking over their shoulder on every choice. as we aggregate more and more sets of data. I think the other thing we need to think about is we don't just think at a single class level, but an environment level too, because we have to engage diverse individuals into this community as technology developers and users. Because the literature shows that we know that more diverse teams that play a role in this research will actually address more problems that address the larger community. And so if we don't encourage them to come into our spaces early for the educational process, then we're going to be losing out on innovations that are critical to our society.
Fantastic. So with that, what questions do you folks have for the panel? Yes, are we going to do mics? How are we going to do it, Elena? Just for the folks online is what I'm thinking.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the presentation, the remarks. My name is Mike Sheldon. I work at the University of New England, and I have a question that maybe spans both the science research side as well as the translational side into practice. So the age-old issue has been, what's the statistic? 17 years by the time something's shown to be, in a research study to be the most effective thing to do, but then it takes that long to get into practice. So the promise of AI to narrow that gap, to talk a little bit about that, on the education side, so much time is spent educating the students about how to critically analyze the literature. You guys have all referenced the literature, but you can never keep up, right? There's so much that's coming out so fast. How do you evaluate the quality of that? You spoke to this a little bit in terms of how you capture all that data. There's so much more being published all the time. So I'm just kind of curious to any of your thoughts about that. Yes, at some point, that gap will decrease from 17 years to whatever the real-time thing is. And what does that mean in terms of the human interaction piece for clinical decision-making that any clinician will have to weigh? So a lot there, but I really welcome any of your thoughts about that.
Let's take it.
I think one of the big things there is to help optimize research, figure out from the large-scale data patterns that we have or data sets that we have, where can we focus our research? Because speaking from a MedRhythms side and all of our different use cases, whether that is for MS or Parkinson's or stroke, one of the big challenges is how can we make sure it hits as many patients as possible. That's a good use case where AI can help us optimize that research and find the best path forward.
I think another thing is, one of the things that we've been doing is looking for best in class, who provides a product that we can integrate with our EHR, and we don't have to continuously look, is the data right? Is the data drifting? Do we need to do something to adjust it? By engaging with partners who that's their specialty, we're not being all to everything, because you can't be that anymore. It's just too much, too fast, and you'll never succeed if you don't.
One of the driving principles of my life has been that biological function in health and disease is just too complex to understand with your intuition. Our mental models don't suffice. We need computational models to understand the complexity of biology. And so it's what you said, I think. Models help focus. They show us what it is we really understand about biology and disease, and focus our thinking and help refine our thinking about how to treat disease. I think modeling writ large, more than AI, modeling in general, will help focus the drug discovery problem, the early stage selection of compounds, identification of optimal targets. There are interesting notions about how to harness AI to select patients who should be in a drug trial, to enrich the trial, to fill it with patients who are the good test examples and the beneficiaries, the strongest beneficiaries of that drug trial research. So I think focusing our thinking helps accelerate time to therapeutics.
Aileen?
So you asked some really great questions, and I'm going to take your educational questions and sort of separate them into two because I'm going to just have to chew on one of them. But I heard, so how are we going to keep up with the fast pace of change in technology and educating our students? And then the second is how do we, as we get more and more big data in education even, how do we help them distinguish what's correct and what's wrong? That latter one is a real doozy, so I'm going to put that on the side. But I think for the first one, I think that also speaks to why we in higher education need to understand that the way in which we engage with education has to change. A lot of people hear me say that we cannot count on people thinking that access to education stops at age 22. We need to give on-ramps and off-ramps to different types of technology and information throughout individuals' careers because things are drastically changing at such a rate. I tell the students that what we teach them today is not going to be what they need to know in 5 years, 10 years. We're teaching them how to be an adaptive learner, and we need them to learn how to seek out that knowledge. And we have to be, as an institution, be able to provide them with that knowledge when it's opportune.
I want to follow. Aileen made me think of something, and she always does. So, when you look in famous mainstream clinical journals, New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, name your favorite medical journal, increasingly you're seeing papers on machine learning in medicine. And we're here talking about introducing AI and ML in a very real way into the clinic. It means that the way we train physicians will have to change. At the very least, physicians are going to have to understand those machine learning papers that are appearing in JAMA so that they can answer the questions, was this done right? They need to critically evaluate that study and ask critical questions about, does this make sense? Was the learning done correctly? What are the possible pitfalls here? How does this fit into my practice? The same way they can do that for papers on a clinical study or a study on the fundamental mechanism of disease today. They have the biological knowledge to do that. They're going to need the engineering and the computational knowledge to be as critical about this new literature that we're beginning to see.
My comment on that is, that time that, do we really want to speed up that time from the lab to the clinic? We should, but we need to be really cautious. We are looking at kind of black box models. We need to be really careful about, how they're implemented and what the edge cases are that these models have to deal with. So I think, the regulatory agencies really need to start dealing with some of this. I'm actually in favor of having a little bit of a slow transition with this technology.
I think we have time for one more question in the room and then one more online.
Perfect. Yes, Sam.
I can try it out on the mic, maybe you can just say it back. So, Sam Scarpino, Director of AI and Life Sciences and the Institute for Experiential AI at Northeastern. One of the things that Usama, our Executive Director, talks about and mentioned this morning is how much data are being wasted. And I want to think about it in a slightly different context, which is machine learning, artificial intelligence needs the negative outcomes as well as the positive outcomes. And in the context of clinical trials, we often don't get to see those negative outcomes. And I'm sure you all have examples of that. What can we do to try to bring those data into a space where they're now useful and used in AI/ML?
So just to summarize the question, what can we do to enrich the data that we're feeding these AI and ML tools to be sure that we're capturing all of it, not just the positive results, but also the negative results?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at this from the mouse side. We're publishing our 6th paper with one data set, where this is a large video data set, and we've been able to mine it over and over again for different types of analysis and different features coming out of what the animal is doing. And I think, the trick here is to have that data well documented, metadata. We need really rigorous practices, data science kind of practices around that data. And then, of course, to get that data out to our colleagues who can, use it in a good way.
I took the microphone. I shouldn't have because I'm unsure of the answer to your question, but I'm going to riff anyway. I think it depends on who owns that data. Is it owned by a pharmaceutical company? Is it going to be all of it publicly available? I don't know about that. Data being under the control of an academic institution is one thing. Data on a drug trial being under the control of a drug company is something else entirely. I don't know that it will ever become visible.
Well, I agree with you, Ray, except that the NIH paid for it, and I think we own the data and we should have access to it.
If the NIH paid for it, yeah.
So I'm going to take it way down. Because I think we also need to make our workflows within the EHR efficient so that the clinical data that you're trying to capture, whether it's from nursing, whether it's from our providers, is easy and efficient for them to be robust and not skip because I'm into my pajama time and I don't want to be documenting anymore, or the nurse is at the end of her shift and she doesn't want to do any more clicks. So we need to continue from that end user perspective going, as I said, way down into the beginnings of the data collection, those clinical components to really start to make the data entry parts quick and easy and efficient.
So,
One question online.
yeah. So from the interwebs.
From Sean Fitzgerald, he would like to know if you can discuss how AI can help drive external collaboration in healthcare. This is a good one to end on.
So how can AI develop external collaboration in healthcare? The broad topic. Anyone?
Yeah. I think this is where Roux can come in as a great example of using the startup analogy of there's a lot of startups that don't necessarily have the resources to be able to spin up AI models for insert a variety of use cases. This is where a Roux Institute or other academic institutions can be really helpful to support a broad, across the healthcare industry.
A week ago, we just submitted a big grant. And the partners in the grant were Jackson Labs, MDIBL, Mount Design Biological Laboratory, MDI Biosciences, MaineHealth, Roux. It was a multi-partner, the Northern New England Center for Clinical and Translational Research. It was a multi-region, multi-partner effort in computational medicine. The core of the grant was AI and modeling writ large in healthcare as a driver of the regional economic ecosystem and research ecosystem. So Madeline said this today in her panel, Madeline Roux said this today in her panel session, how it's the synthesis of partners across the state, and there are amazing partners in the state that can really drive an engine forward in AI and ML in medicine and healthcare. We're trying to leverage that all we can.
Thank you, Ray. I wanted to just take the last minute or two to comment a little bit, going back to the very first question about being able to cut down the time from research publications to practice. At a very, very high level, I view AI and all of the things that we've been talking about today as an incredible new tool. It's a tool to allow us to practice our clinical care. Just like when the stethoscope was invented, and practitioners at the time were like, what the heck is this thing? I'm used to putting my ear on the patient's chest. And it took them a while to develop the skills needed and an appreciation for that new tool. When all of the imaging modalities arrived within healthcare, X-ray first, CT scans, MRI scans, again, there was a bit of a backlash, I'd say, from clinical communities around, oh, this is going to diminish the usefulness of my clinical skills that I've perfected over years. They're undisputable. Why do I need this technology? And again, over time, there was an accommodation, if you will, a different type of learning that was necessary. And I view AI and all of these technological wonders that are upon us now as a new, incredible set of tools that are going to be at our disposal, and I think are going to advance the practice of medicine for eons to come. So again, to finish how we started, I'm incredibly excited about this. I hope you are all as well. And I'd like to thank all the panelists for a wonderful opportunity to chat with you today. And if I'm not mistaken, we have refreshments for you down the hall. So thank you so much for coming.